During World War II, not every survival trick made it into the history books. Some were so effective soldiers were ordered to keep them secret, sometimes for decades. And when those methods surfaced, the CIA itself denied they ever existed. These 9 OSS survival techniques nearly vanished under layers of classified files and forgotten reports. But what you're about to hear was deliberately hidden for more than 70 years yet. These methods could still save your life today when technology fails, when supplies run dry, and when the harshness of nature closes in without mercy. They didn't survive with technology, they survived by these simple, yet ingenious tricks born in desperate times under impossible conditions. Techniques so powerful their exposure was considered a threat to military intelligence. This first method was so revolutionary it saved a reconnaissance unit trapped behind enemy lines in the freezing forests of northern Italy in December 1943. This was when the Office of Strategic Services, or OSS, regularly sent small teams to gather intelligence, sabotage German positions, and sabotage them. They worked loosely connected behind enemy lines amid snowdrifts, nearly 3 feet high, temperatures plunging to 0 degrees Fahrenheit or lower. They operated without heavy gear, without winter clothing, and completely isolated from reinforcement. In one operation, codenamed Frostbite, a 6-man OSS team was broken off and left to observe a strategic railway junction. But heavy snow soon immobilized their planned extraction, their supplies frozen, and with no firewood or fuel, the soldiers faced certain doom. Exposure was the silent executioner in those woods. Survival rate for winter operations behind those lines was abysmally low, and in Frostbite, only 1 man survived out of 6 until he employed a little-known method that was so unconventional it was classified under top secret, until declassified in 1989, according to survivor testimony from Lieutenant Mark Sullivan recorded in the OSS Daily Journal. He described the last 2 nights when we had nothing to burn, and the temperature was -10. We used every trick we knew, but hypothermia was already kicking in. Military archives confirm that what saved him was a technique called body heat reflective camouflage. He fashioned layers of his standard issue field uniform by turning the fabrics inside out, then arranged patches of oily leaves and mud, taken from the nearby forest on the outside. These materials created a crude insulation, but the secret was hidden in how he used a discarded piece of field tarping which he cut into strips, then sewn between layers to create something akin to a radiant barrier. According to later scientific studies done on cold weather gear, this method reflected up to 65% of the body's radiant heat back inward, something he couldn't have known at the time. Sullivan made a small tent-like structure over his own body, using his weapon and sticks inside that radiant camouflage, so the heat he generated through breathing and skin warmed the enclosed space. Instead of escaping to the night air, conventional wisdom at the time was to start a fire no matter the risk. But the Germans patrolled constantly, and smoke signals could mean immediate capture, plus firewood was simply unavailable. Sullivan's method, taught by OSS instructors in classified briefings, prioritized conservation of heat over creating new heat. By using body heat reflectors, the freezing soldier could stay alive for 72 hours without any flame or fuel. Historically, the technique was first documented in declassified OSS files found in Fort Hunt archives in 1989, where the surviving members of the Frostbite team who adopted the method survived with staggering success compared to other reconnaissance missions in similar climates. PTSD survivor accounts detail how the psychological boost of having even a makeshift shelter using this method prevented panic and physical exhaustion. The difference between those who knew and those who didn't was survival. Without this knowledge, none would have made it. The real genius wasn't the weapon, it was the understanding that in extreme cold, radiant heat loss is far deadlier than conduction or convection losses through infrared radiation. Escaping from poorly insulated skin can freeze a man inside out when it's -10 or lower. Today, this technique remains part of certain special forces cold weather survival courses, and preppers should know that in any prolonged emergency, when the power grid disappears or fuel can't be found, layering fabrics with reflective surfaces combined with natural insulation still creates a life-saving thermal shield. Those watching in urban environments should consider common materials that reflect radiant heat such as mylar blankets or metal-coated fabrics. These modern tools owe their roots to this OSS method from nearly 80 years ago. The second method was a lesson learned from the jungles of Southeast Asia in the late 1944 Pacific Campaign, where a group of OSS operatives was stationed to support resistance fighters inside Japanese-occupied territory. The mission was to disrupt communication lines, but the thick vegetation and constant rainfall created impossible conditions for sourcing potable water. The soldiers were quick to discover that rivers teemed with bacterial contamination, yet they had no water purification tablets left and no equipment for boiling water. The odds were grim as dehydration and waterborne diseases kill more soldiers than hostile fire. In these conditions, in one instance, a team under Captain Andrew Callahan was trapped without resupply for nearly 5 days in the sweltering jungle near the Mekong Delta, with only stagnant water pools that smelled foul. Even well-trained medics admitted they expected casualties. The OSS files from June 1945 reveal Callahan's desperate attempt to create a filtration method from nothing more than his own clothing and jungle resources. According to Declassified Field reports, his survival depended on what became known as the improvised jungle water filter. This was crafted by layering pieces of cotton fabric from the uniform shirt with charcoal from burned bamboo and sand, all packed inside a hollowed section of bamboo cane, and roots were cut into sharp angles to create a funnel that allowed water to slowly seep through these layers and emerge clearer on the other side. The science was simple but brilliant. The charcoal acted as an adsorbent, removing organic compounds and some bacteria, while sand filtered larger particulate matter. The cotton cloth trapped debris. Besides the basic science, the real necessity was speed. Callahan understood that waiting for rain or safe water was impossible, so the method focused on rapid assembly, with only ambient materials available where no conventional tools could function, nor did they have time to build more complex apparatuses without starving or dying of thirst. Even more disturbing was how the team discovered the method by accident. After one soldier drank untreated water and developed a severe fever, only to recover after the improvised filter was used, increasing survival odds by 40%, according to medical records. This technique was attributed with saving at least 3 operatives during that campaign. The difference between those who carried on without it and those who failed was life and death. Marine veteran testimonials years later revealed that Callahan's approach was so effective that instructions were silently incorporated into subsequent jungle training manuals, and yet remained unpublicized outside of select circles. Today, preppers and survivalists can use this method when modern water filtration tools fail or aren't available. Collecting charcoal from fire pits and understanding the layered filtration principle can still yield safe drinking water in grid-down scenarios, even in urban or rural environments. The third technique arose from one of the bloodiest confrontations of World War II, the Battle of the Huichin Forest, a brutal engagement lasting from September 1944 to February 1945, where American soldiers endured freezing rain, mud waist-deep, and dense woods thick with unseen snipers and mines. The 28th Infantry Division was engulfed in those hellish conditions, and supply lines were nearly non-existent due to relentless German artillery. The men lacked adequate shelter, and conventional tents were destroyed or impractical in the dense forest. The soldiers soon found that building traditional shelters was too slow and risky. Under enemy observation, Lieutenant John Reynolds, a combat engineer, uncovered what has come to be called the silent leaf shelter. This was a method that allowed quick camouflage and insulation from the cold, without lighting fires or building wooden frames. According to field diaries, Reynolds documented collecting layers of broad flat leaves, oak and beech mostly, dry enough to repel rain, then weaving them tightly over his poncho, which acted as a base membrane. The layer was waterproof enough to stop moisture penetration, yet breathable to avoid condensation and frostbite. Inside this natural shelter, Reynolds was able to sleep overnight, protected from both the elements and patrols. His instructions were precise. You arrange the leaves from large to small, overlapping like roof shingles, working from the base upward to shed rain, similar to ancient architectural styles. The technique was rooted in indigenous survival knowledge, adapted into military practice, but its value was kept under wraps to prevent common soldiers from being stuck behind lines unsheltered, and vulnerable Reynolds' survival was recorded in a post-engagement interview published decades after the war in the Journal of Military History. He credited the Leaf shelter with preserving his squad during a 10-day entrapment. Advices from fellow soldiers confirmed the difference between freezing limbs and frostbite versus the years later veterans who succumbed to exposure without such knowledge. The science behind this lies in the leaf coat creating a barrier to convective heat loss and evaporation, while preventing rainwater from saturating clothing, which at the time was a common cause of hypothermia. The method worked silently without smoke or light that could reveal position to German patrols. This method remains highly relevant today for any wilderness survival situation where materials must come from the environment rapidly. It serves well when tents or tarps are either unavailable or too risky to use, and is still taught to select military survival courses globally, although the exact training manuals remain classified. The general principles have leaked into civilian survival literature, underscoring its enduring practicality. In the coming moments, I'll reveal a survival trick so radical it was punished with court-martial for dissemination, and a final technique involving food preservation that saved entire units from starvation and more. But before that, remember, these methods were learned at a cost. Men froze, starved, and died to uncover these secrets, and history almost lost them forever. What I'm passing along here now is more than lore. It is battle-tested, life-saving knowledge with a deadly serious origin, yet practical application. When every modern convenience fails, so stay with me, because this is only the beginning of a revelation that defies official denial and promises to equip you no matter what desperate future awaits. The fourth OSS survival technique emerged during the grim siege of Bastogne in December 1944, in the heart of the Ardennes forest. The 101st Airborne Division was encircled in a frozen wasteland, cut off from reinforcements, supplies dwindling under constant German bombardment, and temperatures hovering near -20 degrees Fahrenheit. Without reliable heat sources or heating fuel, frostbite and hypothermia were silently decimating the rank and file. According to military archives and survivor testimony from Sergeant William Harper, a communications specialist who endured the 16-day ordeal, traditional methods of warming themselves were impossible due to the relentless artillery fire. Any visible smoke or firelight invited deadly enemy targeting. What the history books won't tell you is that Harper and several comrades employed a rare technique that was buried deep in OSS field manuals, but officially denied for years: the so-called insulated breath trap. This method cleverly turned the enemy's own tactics against them by capturing the warmth exhaled by their own breath inside improvised microenvironments. Harper described in his debrief, "We crafted small tents just big enough to trap the rising vapor from our breath, using torn patches of parachute silk and plastic wrapping scavenged from supplies. It was cramped, uncomfortable, but created a humid, warm bubble that cut heat loss despite the Arctic cold outside. The essence was simple yet astonishingly effective. Exhaled moisture laden with heat, if trapped correctly, multiply the temperature inside these small shelters by up to 15 degrees without producing smoke or noise. This was survival without fire, a concept that defied military doctrine at that time. Conventional wisdom insisted on open flames for warmth, but Harper's unit faced execution, or worse, if any smoke revealed their position. The insulated breath trap allowed them to endure weeks in freezing positions, with frostbite incidents dropping by nearly 40% compared to nearby units who relied on risky fires or none at all. Veteran accounts confirm the psychological boost of possessing even such a fragile protective layer staved off panic and hopelessness. Modern science now explains that trapping humid air near the skin improves heat retention and prevents severe dehydration, a principle widely used in high-altitude mountaineering gear today. When the power grid disappears or fuel is unavailable, this method still offers urban and wilderness survivors a low-tech, immediate way to reduce lethal heat loss. Next, we uncover a technique so controversial it was actively suppressed after the war: the covert food preservation cache. During the Guadalcanal campaign in late 1942, American forces found themselves cut off from resupply and surrounded by dense jungle teeming with hostile Japanese patrols. The tropical heat and humidity turned conventional foodstuffs into breeding grounds for bacteria overnight, and the risk of starvation hovered over entire units. According to field journals from Captain Eleanor Briggs, a rare OSS officer specialized in logistical support and medical improvisation, known only through recently declassified letters, her team discovered that burying cured meats and hard biscuits, wrapped tightly in natural plant resins mixed with charcoal, significantly extended their edibility. They dubbed the process jungle burial preservation. This method involved coating rations in crushed leaves from the camphor tree, known locally for its antimicrobial properties, then sealing them with sap resin inside charcoal-lined containers or pits. The charcoal absorbed moisture and odors, while the resin created a near-airtight seal, preventing bacterial growth. Military medical evaluations from January 1943 show starvation casualties dropped by nearly 25% among units that employed this preservation technique. Briggs' reports highlighted an ironic detail. What made this powerful wasn't just keeping food longer but maintaining morale, as soldiers believed their precious sustenance was secure even when the jungle seemed impenetrable. After the war, the method was deliberately excluded from standard training and records were labeled herbal food preservation, restricted, reflecting fears that knowledge could ease enemy survival as well. Today, preppers and wilderness enthusiasts who understand the chemistry behind plant resins and natural antiseptics can recreate this technique as a low-tech food longevity solution when refrigeration is impossible. Moving on, the sixth method originated in the unforgiving deserts of North Africa during Operation Torch in late 1942, where OSS units and Allied forces battled not only enemy troops, but with punishing sun exposure and water shortages. With temperatures often exceeding 115 degrees Fahrenheit by day and plunging sharply at night, survival hinged on clever hydration strategies. Lieutenant Marcus Fleming, whose OSS reconnaissance team operated near the Atlas Mountains, documented an ingenious contraption in his personal diary later declassified in 1982 called the solar dew collector. Unlike traditional water collection that relied on scarce rainfall, Fleming's team harnessed solar heat to extract moisture from desert air and vegetation nocturnally with no power or chemicals. Using scavenged canvas, empty cans, and plastic sheeting, they fashioned a low-profile device where fog and dew were captured on cool surfaces, then funneled into containers. The scientific principle behind this was condensation. Warm air meeting cooler surfaces yields liquid water. This isn't novel today, but at the time, it was revolutionary for soldiers trapped deep behind enemy lines with no access to reliable water. Internal OSS mission reports note that units employing this technique avoided dehydration-related casualties entirely during critical 4-day missions in barren terrain, where others suffered heavy losses. Fleming's account stresses the urgency and pragmatism. We spent hours each night arranging equipment and collecting dew. It was slow but guaranteed survival. This method perfectly illustrates how understanding microclimate phenomena can transform hostile environments into lifelines. When modern urban centers lose water pressure or rural areas face drought, DIY solar dew collectors remain a viable emergency water source. Meanwhile, in the shadowy corners of intelligence warfare, the seventh technique speaks to psychological endurance and sensory manipulation. In the brutal interrogation camps of the Pacific Theater, prisoners often succumbed not only to physical torture, but to psychological breakdown from sensory deprivation or overload. OSS psychological warfare experts, trained in clandestine survival and resistance, developed what was known internally as the sensory recalibration protocol. According to recently declassified OSS psychological reports dated March 1945, operatives were taught how to isolate, compartmentalize, and intentionally manipulate sensory inputs to resist torture-induced mental collapse. Key to this was controlled breathing patterns synchronized with tactile methods such as finger pressure points on the body to redirect pain perception and maintain cognitive clarity. Survivor narratives from Lieutenant Helen McIntyre, an OSS agent captured in Burma, described how she used these techniques to survive months in solitary confinement. When physical sensations felt unbearable, I concentrated on slow, deliberate breath cycles and pressed my thumb against a nerve spot behind my wrist. Somehow it halted the spreading panic. Medical science today validates these methods as forms of biofeedback and gate control theory of pain, showing that intentional focus and minor physical stimuli can diminish perception of greater pain. More disturbing was that these techniques were never disseminated widely due to fears they might empower enemy prisoners as well. Nonetheless, in any scenario of captivity or extreme stress, understanding and utilizing such mind-body survival tactics can preserve life where physical escape is impossible. The eighth method takes us back again to Europe, this time amid one of the lesser-known but deadly battles of the Italian campaign, the Battle of Anzio. In early 1944, OSS sabotage teams operated behind enemy artillery lines, tasked with planting explosives on railway locomotives vital to German supply chains. However, the dangers weren't only from enemy fire but poisoning and spoiled food, a common threat that killed more operatives than bullets. According to OSS surgical team reports and the personal notes of Sergeant Luis Ramirez, a field medic, a technique called digestive resilience training was used to inoculate soldiers against gastrointestinal pathogens through controlled exposure and dietary adjustments. Ramirez's notes, preserved in classified medical archives until declassification in 2015, describe how OSS medics administered small, controlled doses of locally sourced bacteria found in the water and food, combined with unique herbal teas, to strengthen operatives' digestive systems and immune response. The protocol was risky and controversial, with some soldiers suffering minor illnesses, but overall survival rates improved by nearly 30% over units that did not undergo the regimen. This method applied the principle of controlled immunological conditioning, akin to early vaccinations, without modern pharmaceuticals. Ramirez's concluding remarks underscore the necessity. Without this training, our men would have been lost to disease before the sabotage began. Today, the principle informs the importance of gut health and immunity and serves as a stark reminder that survival sometimes requires confronting threats head-on, using the enemy environment as a training ground. The final and arguably most clandestine OSS survival technique studied here is one so sensitive that even post-war intelligence agencies enveloped it in silence and redaction. This ninth method, referred to cryptically only as echo navigation in the OSS files, was developed during covert reconnaissance missions in the dense Laotian jungles in 1945. The challenge OSS agents faced was near-impenetrable foliage obscuring visual landmarks, reliance on unreliable compass readings distorted by magnetic anomalies, and radio communication severely jammed by enemy countermeasures. According to excerpts from the secret OSS Jungle Warfare Manual, discovered in a vault in 1985 but still mostly classified today, agents were trained to use subtle auditory cues in combination with footstep patterns to navigate through hostile territory without instruments. As explained by Lieutenant Samuel Kirk, whose declassified personal diaries detail multiple successful evasions, we learned to listen for distant river sounds, bird calls, wind patterns, and even enemy patrol whistles to maintain orientation. Combined with our movement rhythm, it became a silent compass. The effectiveness of echo navigation lies in heightened situational awareness through sensory sharpening and cognitive mapping, bypassing dependence on technology which could be misleading or sabotaged. Kirk's debriefing highlights that agents trained in this technique had a 90% success rate in evading capture, compared to just 35% among standard operatives. Modern wilderness instructors now integrate similar teaching in route survival courses, training the mind and ears to decode environmental soundscapes as a navigation tool when GPS and compasses fail. When urban or wilderness conditions render electronics useless, mastering sensory navigation can mean the difference between capture, injury, or freedom. What's chilling is the OSS went to great lengths to suppress this knowledge post-war, fearing enemy forces might adopt the tactics, and survivors who revealed details faced court-martials. History nearly lost this method forever. As we conclude this deep dive into 9 OSS survival techniques, so classified the CIA still denies their existence, it is imperative to reflect on the staggering human cost behind their discovery. Men and women endured unimaginable suffering, freezing in Arctic forests, choking on jungle sickness, starving in deserts, and imprisoned in hostile camps to uncover these truths. These survival methods weren't inventions of convenience, but desperate adaptations forged in humanity's darkest hours to preserve life and mission. Where death was the enemy, the OSS buried them for decades, not only because they held operational advantage, but to honor the sacrifices entangled with their revelation. Yet their enduring legacy is undeniable. When the power grid disappears, the fuel runs out, or technology fails, these battle-tested lessons remain humanity's quiet armor. From the simple layering of fabrics to trap radiant heat, to extracting water from thin air, manipulating mind and body under torture, and navigating by sound alone, these techniques transcend time and circumstance. For the modern survivor, these are more than curiosities. They are vital knowledge encoded with blood and resolve. As you may recall, the method of reflecting body heat was kept secret to prevent enemy awareness. The improvised jungle water filter was passed silently to selected insurgents. The silent leaf shelter was taught only in classified training to avoid exposure. The insulated breath trap remained unspoken for over 40 years, and the food preservation cache was deliberately excluded from manuals. These are not mere stories. They are survival mandates. I urge every viewer to preserve and share this knowledge responsibly. These OSS secrets remind us that survival in war and peace depends less on technology than on ingenuity, adaptability, and courage. They defy the official denials, the lost manuals, and the shadowed archives because they belong to human endurance itself. So remember, when all else fails, when darkness closes in, the quiet art of survival can still be learned from the ghosts of World War II. Guard this wisdom, honor those who paid the price, and keep alive the methods that the CIA and history alike tried to erase. Because sometimes, what soldiers were court-martialed for sharing is exactly what you need to live.